Hello, and welcome to the RadioTimes.com Doctor Who podcast Christmas special. That's why I was doing the sleigh bells. I could have probably just licensed some free-to-use sleigh bell music, but I couldn't be bothered to look online. My name's Hugh.
My name's Morgan.
And this week, appropriate for the day on which this podcast is first being released, we are looking at the very best Doctor Who festive special. Now, you might think, how could they possibly decide? And the truth is, we didn't. You did. Yeah, we got our readers on RadioTimes.com to vote for their favourite festive episode of Doctor Who, and 6,000 people voted, and we have our results. So just to be clear, we had some very strict rules on this. The episode had to air on or around the festive kind of period, so Christmas and New Year, that sort of area. It also had to, in some way, theme to Christmas or New Year. The episode either had to be set on one of those days, or it had to kind of suggest it. So, for example, Spyfall, last year's New Year's episode of Doctor Who, didn't count because that was the first episode of the series. It wasn't a special, and it wasn't particularly set on New Year's Day. Similarly, The Unquiet Dead, which is Christopher Eccleston episode, which is set on Christmas Day, aired in the spring, I think, and isn't a Christmas special, so that one also didn't count. So yeah, basically it meant we ran all the Christmas specials plus Resolution. I have a 2019 New Year special, and then the Feast of Stephen from 1965, which is the William Hartnell kind of Christmas special. And we had a winner. I mean, Morgan, do you want to do the honours? Do you want to announce which is fans' favourite?
Sure. Drum roll, please. And I believe this episode previously won a similar RadioTimes.com poll a few years back. The winner is, you have crowned as your favourite Doctor Who festive special, A Christmas Carol from 2010.
Yes, as Morgan said, A Christmas Carol won when we ran this poll in 2018, and it won pretty handily this time. I will say the poll was pretty close. We had a lot of, especially at the top, quite a close run, but this one was kind of winning all the way through. And it's quite interesting because it's an episode that I feel like fans sometimes don't like. I think it's one of the ones that kind of, among what I'd call the Twitterati of Doctor Who fans, it gets a bit of a bad rap. But consistently, when you ask people to name a Doctor Who episode they really like, or a Doctor Who festive special rather they really like, they go for A Christmas Carol. And we're going to kind of delve into why we think that is and that episode a little bit in a minute. But first, we're just going to run through the rest of the list and see what didn't win and what didn't do well. So we've got 15 things. Morgan, do you want to go for the first one there at number 15?
So at number 15, coming in last place, and I think this is unfair, is the return of Dr. Mysterio, the Christmas Day special from 2016, which got just 1% of the vote.
I do think that's quite bad. I did really enjoy that episode when it came out. I think it's very fun. The weird thing about it is that it almost feels like it's a non-canonical episode of Doctor Who, in that it basically in no way impacts on the plot of any previous episode or any episode afterwards. And it sort of introduces a load of characters who then just disappear. Although it is kind of the first beginning of the kind of Nardole era of Doctor Who, because this was filmed in the middle of the Pearl Mackie kind of Nardole trifecta with Peter Capaldi, and so Nardole's kind of just turning up here. But yeah, I mean, that was also a year where we didn't have any Doctor Who, wasn't it? So that was kind of coming at the end of it. Maybe we were a bit hyped because that was all we had that year.
Maybe, but I don't know. Like, I remember enjoying that episode, and I had a little trepidation around that episode. I was like, Doctor Who does superheroes. This could be a disaster. And again, maybe I went into it with low expectations, but I think people possibly now misremember that episode and think it's worse than it is because of that whole central idea of Doctor Who doing superheroes. They go, oh, the superhero episode. But actually, I thought it pulled it off pretty well. I thought it was quite fun, quite funny, quite romantic. I think you don't want every episode of Doctor Who to be like that, but as a one-off on Christmas Day, I thought it worked. I feel like last place is harsh for Dr. Mysterio.
That said, something does have to come last. Do you know what I mean? Like, maybe we'll talk about what we think should have come last later. Yeah, so that's Dr. Mysterio in last place. Just above it, at number 14, we have The Doctor, The Widow, and The Wardrobe, which was Matt Smith's second Doctor Who Christmas special, which had 2% of the vote. It's quite a fall between his first and second year. And I would say, though, like, I feel like this is an episode that isn't beloved. You know, I think it is. I mean, it's a very interesting idea. I think it's kind of similarly, we'll talk about A Christmas Carol kind of does something quite clever with the Doctor, kind of making him kind of retelling this classic Christmas story with a Doctor Who twist. And I think maybe they try to do something similar with The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe, obviously kind of referring to The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but it doesn't quite come off. I mean, what do you think, Morgan?
Yeah, no, referring back to what you were just saying about which specials should have come last. For me, it is this one. I'm not particularly keen on it. I don't think it's a particularly memorable special. I also think it's a difficult balance to strike, especially with these Christmas specials, being sort of good-natured and sweet without crossing the line to being saccharine. And I think this episode does cross that line. I'll never forgive it for the phrase "humany woomany." For introducing that into the Doctor Who lexicon. It does no episode of Doctor Who is entirely without merit, I don't think, and this episode does have its moments. So there's the really sweet final scene in this where the Doctor shows up on Amy and Rory's doorstep for Christmas. I really like that moment, because apart from that brief sequence, Amy and Rory don't feature in this episode, which I think is another point that counts against it. So yeah, not one of my favourites. A bit naff, that one, in my opinion.
It was a light filming week for Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill. I do actually, because I feel like Christmas Carol was fairly light on the companions as well, wasn't it? Because they were off on the ship, just being ghosts and stuff. Like they do play an important part though.
They do play a part. It's not just that they're at home, which is the case of Doctor Widow in the Wardrobe.
I do think it's a shame as well, because it has a great guest cast, like Bill Bailey's in that one, and they have Claire Skinner from Outnumbered.
Arabella Weir and Alexander Armstrong, but I don't think it makes the most of them. I think Bill Bailey in particular, Bill Bailey in Doctor Who, fantastic, and he's got a bit part essentially. He's wasted.
Yeah, definitely. All right, just above that, at number 13, we have, now I think this is an outrage. At number 13, The Next Doctor with 3%. I think this is the lowest rated David Tennant special on our list by some margin. And I really like this episode. I think this one's really good fun.
I quite like it too, but I do think that's a divisive one. I think fans either like it or loathe it, that one. I do think it's a mixed bag. Having said, I think there's a reason the cyber shades haven't made a comeback.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, and I know that I like the big ridiculous climax with the gigantic cyber king. I think it's fun, but I know a lot of people don't like it. But I think
for me, I just don't remember any of that stuff. I'm aware that happened, but for me, it's all like I just think of David Morrissey in that great coat and the two doctors running around Victorian England. Like I just think that's such a fun idea, and it's such a nice aesthetic.
Yeah, no, and David Morrissey is great in it as well. Like he's really good. And the whole idea behind his character Jackson Lake, and he's got this sort of the mental fugue, and it's quite a sort of it brings a sort of, I think it works in the Christmas specials when, to offset some of that, that festivity and that jollity and that what can be quite saccharine, you have a slightly sort of darker twist to it, and you have that in this. That this is a guy who essentially lost his family, and so he's got this mental block, and he's essentially lost his mind and thinks he's the Doctor. So, and I think he's fantastic in that reveal scene. And you've got is it Miss Hartigan, the villainess? Fantastic character as well. So yeah, no, I think 13th is harsh. Unlucky for some, unlucky for the Next Doctor.
Definitely. That had 3% of the vote. The next one in our list, at number 12, so just higher, also had 3% of the vote. It was only 4 votes in it, very close between those two. And it's also a Victorian Doctor Who Christmas special. It's The Snowmen, which is not Aled Jones Turns Evil, unfortunately. That'd be a great episode. It was basically the sort of introduction of Jenna Coleman, but kind of the second one before Jenna Coleman properly came in, because Jenna Coleman was sort of in it a bit and then not in it a bit a few times. And this is obviously the Doctor being all grumpy, again in Victorian England. And I'm trying to remember, it was the Great Intelligence, wasn't it? They had Ian McKellen voicing the Great Intelligence, and they had a bit of a Sherlock riff, and they had evil snowmen that would eat people. And I don't really remember the plot of this. I remember there was a kind of icy Mary Poppins at some point.
But this is it. I don't think that's a bad episode, but I also think it's not top tier, is it? It's one of the less memorable ones. So like we sort of what was that one? Oh yeah, it was the snowmen that popped up and ate people, and Ian McKellen. You sort of remember like moments, but it doesn't linger long in the memory of the snowmen. Again, I think it's got some really nice parts to it. There's the scene with Victorian Clara, the barmaid, going up the spiral staircase and then finding the TARDIS floating on a cloud, and then you have the reveal of the latest TARDIS interior. I think all that stuff's really nice. it's a solid episode. I just don't think it ranks up there with the very best festive specials.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Actually, I've forgotten that imagery of her going on the cloud. That is a really nice moment, and the Michael Pickwoad TARDIS is so nice. Like, it's definitely my favourite of the modern series. It's nice, although it got better. I do think it's still such a great kind of unveiling. So just above the Snowmen at number 11, we have our first Peter Capaldi entry of the list with 5% of the vote. It's Last Christmas. I don't know what you think about this, Morgan, because we weren't working together when this came out. But I remember at Radio Times Towers, we were very pro Last Christmas. We thought it was really good.
I love Last Christmas. I think it's one of the best. And it came as well off the back of Series 8, which was a bit more divisive. I think the reaction to that at the time, at least, was a bit more sort of lukewarm. People weren't quite sure about how they felt about all of it. And then Last Christmas, I thought, really nailed it. It's this sort of brilliant Alien meets Inception fusion with Nick Frost as Santa Claus. I mean, what a combination that is. And I think it starts to develop Peter Capaldi's Doctor in really interesting ways as well. Like, we see some more of the more genial side of him start to come out as well. It's got a really strong guest cast. Nick Frost, as I said, Faye Marseille as the companion who wasn't, but very nearly was. I really like Last Christmas. I think it's, again, maybe it plays slightly more to my tastes in that it does have the Christmas frivolity, but it also has a slightly darker side to it as well. Although I think it would have been stronger, possibly better remembered, if it had ended as originally intended with Clara's exit.
I was going to say, because basically, for anyone who doesn't know, that was supposed to be the episode Jenna Coleman left the series. Instead, she decided to stay on an extra year because Peter Capaldi and Stephen Moffat begged her to. So, basically, they basically did have it pretty much as it was in the episode, except at the end it wasn't another dream and Clara was basically fine. I think was the difference.
I think the original plan was that she would, because the Doctor goes and visits her and she's old, and in the final episode that's revealed to be another dream. But in the original intention, in the original script, it would have been that Clara really was old, and then she passed away, and then it cuts, apparently, funny that we just referenced it, to a shot of her going up the spiral staircase. And that's how, a little reference back, and that's how that episode was going to end, which I think would have been really sort of beautiful, but also maybe a bit of a downer for Christmas Day.
Yeah, and there were some really great episodes with her after that, so it's hard to kind of begrudge them it. I did also, one thing I do always remember about that episode, which I really like, was there's that bit where he helps the old Clara like pull a cracker, which is something she does for Matt Smith's Doctor in The Time of the Doctor, which I think, which we'll get to in a minute, which I think, I thought that was a nice little bit. The thing I always remember about this episode is that, like, I was like, this is just like a Doctor Who episode. It wasn't like really corny and cheesy. It was quite scary. Like, there was a bit where, like, there's loads of advancing squid monsters, and it's very, like, quite confusing, not in a bad way, but you had to think quite hard about what was going on. There were a lot of twists. It kind of felt to me like Stephen Moffat trying to do his usual Doctor Who thing with a Christmas spin rather than trying to tell a Christmas story that didn't really matter, if that makes sense. But the one thing it has counting against it, unfortunately for me, which is irrecoverable, is that it has Danny Pink in it. And Danny Pink was rubbish. I'm sorry.
I quite like the way in which he featured. I'd forgotten actually that he's in it, and I quite like the way in which they bring him into it. I feel like it gave him a bit more of a solid send off than how he ends up, his fate in Series 8, which I wasn't so much a fan of.
Yeah, still. So that was Last Christmas at number 11. That had 5% of the vote. Also with 5% of the vote, but a bit of a wider gap. There's about 40 votes between. Is we just talked about actually The Time of the Doctor. So that was the 2013 special. It was Matt Smith's exit. It kind of followed the day of the Doctor, and it's a funny one, this, isn't it? Because it's one of those episodes where there's loads of really great bits, but also just lots of very strange kind of baggy bits. It's kind of Matt Smith doing like an evening with Matt Smith. Is that like he's come out and sat on a stool and he's just telling you tales, and you're sort of enjoying it because of his charisma, and he's kind of doing his lap of honor essentially. But I'm not really sure what the story is. The story is the Doctor hangs out in some town for 1,000 years and fights off a wooden Cyberman at one point.
Yeah, I think putting this one above Last Christmas is, again, an outrage. I 100% agree. It's got some nice moments. I mean, the final regeneration scene, I really like. I think Matt nails that. And also, I know the sneeze regeneration gets a bit of stick. But I really like that because it's playing against expectation in that, you know, you have David Tennant to Matt Smith, so like bombastic, the regeneration. You just moments before have had Matt doing his kind of the 11th Doctor doing the biggest, most ridiculous sort of faux regeneration of all time, where he's shooting regeneration energy all around the place and spinning his arms. So I like that it's so kind of sudden and shocking when he turns into Peter Capaldi.
I don't know what else you do with that at that point, because it's like you've gone big. It's kind of like the only thing
Yeah.
to be interesting is to go small. And I actually thought when Peter Capaldi actually regenerated into Jodie Whittaker, it was a bit of a letdown. But it was just kind of like, again, it was kind of Eccleston to Tennant kind of levels of like, psh, you know.
Yeah, no, it was like Tennant to Smith, but just not as big.
Yeah.
So that's a bit underwhelming. Whereas that's why I like the sneeze regeneration. But yeah, no, I totally agree. There's lots of interesting moments and fun ideas in Time of the Doctor, but almost too much. It is a little baggy. It feels a little overstuffed. Not my favorite. And I love the 11th Doctor era. And for me, I remember at the time feeling like it didn't quite cap it off in the way I wanted.
I would say I rewatched it a year or two ago. I can't remember why, and it was more fun than I remembered it being at the time. I think maybe with kind of a bit of distance, I had less of an expectation of it. So maybe that's one that's worth revisiting. Maybe not. At number 9, we have at 6% The Runaway Bride, which is interesting because this is an episode that I think is very popular, and I would have expected it to be a bit higher on the list. We are in the top 10 now, as of the time of the Doctor, so it is in the top 10. But there's only 15, and we're kind of pushing it for what is, you know, what is a special anyway. But yeah, the Runaway Bride, obviously Catherine Tate's kind of big entry into Doctor Who. It was kind of, I'd say, the peak almost. I mean, I think we came slightly a year afterwards with Voyage of the Damned, but it's kind of in the peak of the sort of Beatlemania, Tennant mania sort of period of Doctor Who. I don't know. What do you think of its positioning, Morgan?
I agree with you. I'm surprised because I think generally it's quite popular. So I was surprised to not see it do better. For me, it's about in the right place. Right. I think it's a fun episode. Again, I sound like a broken record, but it has some fun moments. The sort of car chase with the TARDIS is great. I do think the character of Donna feels a lot more human and real in when she returns in series 4. Which is fair enough because they know she's a regular character, a main cast member. They make more of an effort to kind of flesh her out and give her more depth. I feel like in this, she's a little too one note for me, which I know is controversial. I know fans love Donna, but I feel like in this, she's there to serve this purpose, right? But I just feel like she's a bit one note. And that dynamic between her and the 10th Doctor, which is fun at first, it does get a little old, I think, towards the end.
I agree with you. I mean, I with all of these, I've tried to sort of think back to what I thought the first time I watched it, quite often, which was just for fun, you know, before I was doing this. And I remember I found her really annoying in The Runaway Bride. And and like, people forget this, but at the time, I think quite a few fans were slightly horrified at the idea of her coming in as a full-time companion because they were like, God, she was like just so shouty. But like you said, Donna was so good in series 4. I think because, like you said, they kind of let Catherine Tate play a character and didn't make Catherine Tate be a sketch character. Do you know what I mean? There is a lot of fun in this episode, and I think, you know, there's some stuff I really enjoy, like the TARDIS kind of flying around with the cars, and, you know, the more Father Christmas, you know, attacks. I mean, that's kind of a running theme anyway. But I think actually, like you say, it's probably not ridiculous that this is where it is. Okay, just above, unless you had anything else to add.
No, I'm all good.
Just above, at number 8, with 7%, so just ahead of The Runaway Bride, we have Twice Upon a Time. So this is obviously Peter Capaldi's last Christmas special, the last Christmas special, possibly, because Doctor Who does New Year's specials now. And it was Peter Capaldi's exit story, and we had David Bradley as the first Doctor. I remember when this was kind of first coming out, it was super exciting that they had David Bradley as the first Doctor. It's kind of mad now. We're just like, oh yeah, that happened, you know, whatever. But it's kind of a funny episode because I remember the first time I watched it, I thought it was really nice and really sweet and stuff. When you watch it again, knowing what the kind of denouement is, you're a bit like, this is a bit pointless, isn't it? Like, there's not really much of a story. It's kind of, because the story is that they were going to, again, it's a sort of story of Stephen Moffat, Peter Capaldi Christmas specials. They had a different thing planned where the Doctor Falls was going to be Peter Capaldi's last episode. But then Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker didn't want to start on Christmas Day, and Stephen Moffat didn't want to make them lose the slot. which they didn't use anyway. So he basically decided to do one extra special. So basically, in the midst of regenerating, the Doctor gets up, walks around World War One a little bit, meets a couple of people, and then goes and regenerates. And that's the story.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I've always said Twice Upon a Time is an episode that doesn't need to exist at all. Having said that, I'm glad it does. I quite like it. Like, yeah, the story is slight because, as you say, Stephen Moffat essentially has to fit in like an hour of drama between Peter Capaldi starting to regenerate and Peter Capaldi finishing regenerating. And Stephen Moffat had already sort of done everything he wanted to do with the Doctor Falls. But I think as a sort of touching postscript, as an epilogue, I quite like it, and it does. You know, there's something in that Doctor, the 12th Doctor, going out with a bang as he does, kind of quite a violent exit in the Doctor Falls. But I also like that we get this opportunity for him to kind of be a bit more nostalgic and also forward looking, and kind of consider his you know, the 12th Doctor was always wrestling with his place in the universe, and I quite like that you get a kind of as I say, a slightly more low key epilogue and exit for the 12th Doctor, where he gets to kind of really come to terms with himself and going on, and then sort of handing over to the next Doctor. So I like this one. I think David Bradley is fantastic, and I know there's a little bit of controversy about how the first Doctor is portrayed. The kind of the joke is that he's literally like a man from the 1960s, which is maybe not quite in line with how the first Doctor was portrayed, or fans' idea of the first Doctor. But I think David Bradley's performance is great. Mark Gatiss, I think, is turns, you know, gives a fun turn in this as well. I like Twice Upon a Time. There you go, said it.
Yeah, I think as well, you know, we shouldn't forget like Pearl Mackie's in the episode, who's an addition that was a bit later on because they realised how popular she was, so they kind of added her in. You have Mark Gatiss, which is kind of nice considering how closely he was involved. It's kind of just a nice, like we said, little victory lap for Peter Capaldi.
Exactly.
And I love how, like, you know, within that, to make it more interesting, they have things like the first Doctor, and they have that archive footage at the beginning, previously on Doctor Who, you know, several hundred episodes ago, all that stuff. I think that's really fun. There's a lot of fun stuff in it. So the next on the list is Voyage of the Damned, which had 468 votes in the poll, 8%. It almost tied with the next one on the list. They were very, very close, but this one was slightly ahead. So slightly behind, rather. So yeah, Voyage of the Damned is obviously the 2007 Doctor Who Christmas special. It was David Tennant and Kylie Minogue. This was really the height of it. This was, I think, the highest rated Doctor Who episode ever. And I think still is. I'm not sure. I think it just about still is. And it was a massive one. It looked very expensive. It was basically space Titanic crashes. The Doctor kind of has to do a Poseidon adventure type thing with a bunch of passengers. And yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those ones where at the time I wasn't massively into it. It was like fine. I think I just the sort of weird kind of aliens and the people who were humans but weren't humans, I sort of found it slightly hard to connect to. All the kind of people who I didn't know, and you know, the fact that it wasn't very about humanity, I found sort of difficult at the time. I think this is me very much riffing. I hadn't really planned that to say anything about, but yeah, I do think it's a really fun episode, and kind of David Tennant's great in it. It's definitely a highlight, and I think he looks really nice in that little tux he wears. So I don't know. What do you think, Morgan?
I do think it's saying something if the best thing you can say about this episode is David Tennant looks great in a tux, which he does. But yeah, no, I think this one's generally I think it's quite popular, isn't it? But like, again, I think it's kind of mid-level, this one for me. Like it is like the peak in many ways of that era of Doctor Who. And I think, again, something that could have gone very wrong, which is casting Kylie Minogue, which sounds like an absolutely crazy idea. Actually, I think she's, you know, quite good in it. Like, it gives a decent performance as Astrid. One thing I remember about this episode and watching it at the time was that this episode builds and builds to like a big reveal as to who's the mastermind behind it all. And I think again, this is a victim of expectation. I think I was expecting some big reveal, like it's Davros or something.
It was just some guy.
and it was just it's me, Max Capricorn. Remember, they sort of referenced me earlier, and I was like, oh, okay. And it was just this guy, a head on a box on wheels, and I was just like, oh, okay. So, you know, it's fine, that one, but not one of my favorites.
I do think it was supposed to be. I might be wrong about this, but I think it was supposed to be quite. It was supposed to be Dennis Hopper was
Yeah,
supposed to be
yeah,
Max. So I think
yeah.
maybe it would have been more of a reveal that it's Dennis
That's it.
Hopper.
It doesn't
But
matter who the It doesn't matter who the character is. If it go and the mastermind behind it all is me, Dennis Hopper, and then you'd be like, oh wow. But as it is, the actor who does it is perfectly fine. But it's not. It doesn't have that kind of wow factor of they've got Dennis Hopper and Doctor Who, which Dennis Hopper and Kylie would have been incredible. But
yeah, I do
we'll
think
see.
weirdly. I mean, it was never going to happen because it's Kylie Minogue. I do think Astrid was a great character. Although I did think
Yeah,
I was always at the time I was thinking I'm not sure if she'd work as a companion because she'd be like, oh, let's go to the history of Stowe. You know, oh, is all this historic which we can't connect with at all. Do you know what I mean? Like it's always
yeah.
people from Earth who's up to oh, it's Queen Victoria, and he goes, oh yeah, Astrid, I'm taking you to meet Grand Admiral Blarg. And she's like, oh my god, we have him on all the Blarg notes.
Yeah. No, well, this is the thing. Like Doctor Who, again, sometimes fans criticize the fact that we've had a lot, almost entirely, all the companions have been human and sort of contemporary humans as well. But I think it makes sense for them serving as audience identification figures because if they're aliens or even figures from Earth's history, you don't have that same level of the Doctor, as you say, the Doctor taking them to see pivotal moments in history and they having the same reaction to it that we would have.
Definitely. So just above Voyage of the Damned, we're up to number 6 now in the countdown. It also is at 8%. These two had about 8 votes between them, so pretty close. We have at number 6, The Husbands of River Song. So this was Peter Capaldi's triultimate, second, I think, Christmas special.
It was anti-penultimate, yeah.
Yes, it was Alex Kingston's, as of yet, last appearance as River Song. It kind of capped off the River Song story on Doctor Who. And it's very popular, clearly. I don't massively rate it, certainly not at the time. I do think there's some fun stuff in it. Again, a little like Catherine Tate, Matt Lucas in this episode is very annoying, and he gets less annoying when he comes back as a full-time companion. I think Alex Kingston's running it, and I actually think Peter Capaldi and Alex Kingston, watching them, you're like, God, they really should have done this earlier and for like more, because they're a really great duo, and all of a sudden they're kind of the right age for each other, which is kind of nice.
I think I think you're spot on there. It's for me, it's like it's mid-level. It's okay. I think it's one to enjoy after a few sherries. Don't take this one too seriously. It is a bit broad for my taste. As you say, Matt Lucas tones it down quite considerably in terms of how broad he is when he becomes a full-time companion. And then you've got Greg Davies as King Hydroflax, quite a broad villain as well. But I think the reason fans, no one's going, I love. No offense to Greg Davies, but no one's saying I love Husbands of River Song because of Hydroflax. He was my fave. Do you know what I mean? It's the reason people love it is because of Peter Capaldi and Alex Kingston and the fantastic chemistry they have. And I think that as much as this one isn't my favorite, the final scene on Beryllium is really sweet and nicely done. It's a nice cap to the River Song era. So I think that's why I think people are more. I think a vote for this episode is more a vote for that scene and that relationship rather than the episode as a whole.
I think you're right. And I do think they did well to kind of retroactively fit this within all the Doctor Who continuity, that it would make sense that this was when he saw her. Because I think technically River has 2 more episodes after this, in that she is in an episode with David Tennant and then she's in an episode with, what's it called? Matt Smith, The Name of the Doctor. So,
yes,
so it all adds up. Okay, so just above that, above the Husbands of River Song, also at 8%, and number 5 in the top 5 now, but with slightly more votes, a bit more of a gap in votes. We have Resolution. So this is Jodie Whittaker's, obviously the only Jodie Whittaker entry on this list because we haven't seen Revolution of the Daleks yet, and Spyfall doesn't count. Resolution is the New Year's special from 2019. Not the first Doctor Who New Year's special, because we had The End of Time part 2 before, which was kind of part New Year, part Christmas. But yeah, obviously we've talked about this episode quite a lot, so there's not too much to say. It's them taking on a Dalek. We talked about it last week, in fact. But kind of interesting to see this one so high, because we were saying last week that it wasn't always one that people talked about. But I mean, obviously, I'm sure it's a lot of people kind of wanting to show support for Jodie and stuff, and she is the current Doctor, so that's always going to give her a bit of an advantage. But yeah, it's nice to see it as high as it is.
Well, as we said last time. I think it's a great episode. I think watching it back, the New Year stuff is a bit tagged on. I think calling it a festive special is a bit of a stretch. There's just like these odd moments where the Doctor goes, "This is my resolution," and and all that kind of thing. And I think you're right in that if there had been more Jodie Whittaker episodes in this list that fans could vote for, maybe the vote would have been slightly more split. I think a vote for because as it stands, a vote for resolution is a vote for Jodie's Doctor. But I do really like this episode. I think festive special, bit of a stretch, but if you just want an hour-long Doctor Who Dalek blockbuster, I think it fits the bill.
I mean, it's definitely set in New Year. You can't say it's not set in It isn't really important to the story in any way, but it is set on New Year's Day for some reason. So just above a resolution at number 4 with 10% of the vote, which is quite interesting. The Feast of Stephen. So this is the William Hartnell kind of episode. So I'm interested to see the people who voted for this, because you can't watch this episode. We included it for completionist's sake, and it's a lot better this year than it did when we included it in 2018. I think maybe a lot of people are voting for it because it's kind of a sort of fun out there choice, and also because, trying to show a bit of support for William Hartnell. Maybe they feel like after The Timeless Child, we need to, show our support for the first Doctor. Who knows? But yeah, I don't know what you think.
I suspect that's the case. I love the first Doctor. I love the Hartnell era, but the Feast of Stephen is not a particularly good episode of Doctor Who. Like it's, and I mean, I've not seen it. I'm not that old, but you can listen to the soundtrack and you can watch reconstructions and things like that, and it's a bit of a mess. Sort of Doctor Who meets light entertainment variety show. But I think you're right. I think just as a vote for resolution was a vote for Jodie, I think a vote for the Feast of Stephen is a vote for the first Doctor, and also a vote for the classic series in general. If you're a fan of classic Who, you might have voted for the Feast of Stephen because this is its only representation in this list. So maybe that plays into it too.
Definitely, and it's the first and for a long time the only Doctor Who Christmas special that the show had. So it definitely deserves a bit of respect for that alone. But now we're into our top 3. And it was pretty close here. This next one was only a little bit ahead of the Feast of Stephen, actually. And number 3, we have the Christmas Invasion, which had 10%. So this is kind of, if you don't count the Feast of Stephen, the first proper Doctor Who Christmas special. David Tennant's big entry. I mean, I'm not surprised to see this here. I was talking about this with Helen on a previous podcast about introductory episodes, which a lot of which happen to be Christmas specials. And Christmas Invasion. It's really fun, isn't it? It's good.
Solid, that one. Really good. I think as well, it has the benefit, or at least had the benefit at the time, of being the first of its kind. At least obviously there was Feast of Stephen, but in the modern series, it's the first of the modern Doctor Who Christmas specials. So we weren't bored yet of robot Santas and killer Christmas trees and that stuff that became almost a little bit of a, it strayed into almost self-parody a little bit with the later Doctor Who Christmas specials. It's the first time you've done it. So it's a good Christmas special, but also it's got that feel good element to it, but also it works as a great introductory episode for the 10th Doctor. And Tennant isn't in it much, of course. Yeah, he doesn't really come into his own until the final act, but he's sort of instantly brilliant and just commands the screen when he does finally appear. But him not looming large also allows Billie Piper to essentially lead the episode for much of its runtime, and I think, given how good she was in the first series, I also think it's quite a nice balance to introduce the new Doctor, but also let Billie lead Christmas Invasion. And you almost don't miss the Doctor because she's so good as Rose.
It definitely helps ease you into it as well, because obviously we forget now, but David Tennant was new. Everyone was probably a little like, oh, where's Christopher Eccleston? Like you kind of foregrounding Rose so much gives us what we know. And then her reaction to the Doctor, her gradual realization that this is the Doctor kind of echoes ours. And I think, that moment where he finally emerges from the TARDIS very near the end of the episode is just so good. And it's so confidently done that by the end, you're like, yeah, I'm excited by, this new Doctor. I think it's done really well. And like you say as well, the fact that it was the first one means you can do all the stuff like, oh, evil Christmas tree, or oh, tangerines and stuff. Like you can kind of, you do it that first time and then it becomes harder. Like every show, I think, most shows don't do as many Christmas specials as Doctor Who has done. It's rare for any show to do this many Christmas specials. Call the Midwife's done them, obviously, but I think other shows and a lot of sitcoms in America or something will do one Christmas special and then not bother again, because you kind of, once you've done it, it's like, how do you keep doing it? So I think, you see, this one has the benefit of being fresh. So we're into our final 2 now. We obviously know what won. So by process of elimination, everyone listening will probably have worked out that number 2, with 11% of the vote, only 9 votes ahead of the Christmas Invasion there, was The End of Time, parts 1 and 2. We jumbled those together because it seemed unfair. So this is David Tennant's final episode. This was, again, kind of in the sort of big peak era of Doctor Who. Huge episode. I remember, the fact they had it on Christmas Day and on New Year's Day, and they were very kind of quite sad episodes, quite sort of grand episodes, lots of guest cast. You brought back all the companions for a kind of little bit at the end. It's the last time we saw John Barrowman in Doctor Who prior to this year, which is kind of mad to think about. And yeah, End of Time, big episode. I mean, how does that one stand up for you, Morgan?
I like it, and I think it does sometimes now retrospectively. I think everyone loved it at the time because it was again putting a cap on the Tennant era, which had been hugely popular. I think now it sometimes gets a little bit of stick for being a bit of a mess. Like there's a lot going on; it's a little bit jumbled. Is it a case of over egging the pudding? But to me, it's a bit of a glorious mess. Like, okay, it's maybe not the most cohesive Doctor Who episode. It's a bit OTT and extravagant. But if you can't be OTT and extravagant when closing the Russell T Davies, David Tennant, Julie Gardner era of Doctor Who, when can you be? Like, I feel like it's kind of earned it by that point. So, no, I really like that one. And I know, we've talked a lot about like sort of certain moments that we remember that kind of overshadow the whole thing. But I do think the regeneration scene kind of is the standout moment, obviously, from End of Time. And I just remember like going, like, Doctor Who can make you feel sad and it can make you feel happy and excited, but I don't think I've ever gone from one emotional state to the other as quickly as with that regeneration, where David Tennant leaves. You go from I don't want to go to Geronimo, and David Tennant regenerates, and you're like, it's devastating. And then immediately Matt Smith arrives, and I'm immediately in love with the 11th Doctor straight away. There was no adjustment period. It was just like David Tennant's gone. I love the new guy. Brilliant. So yeah, I'm still fond of the End of Time.
It's real like emotional whiplash for all the Doctor Who fans. Yeah. I remember that was a very exciting time, like getting this new Doctor and stuff. And I remember being super excited because they ran a trailer, I think, for Matt Smith's first series afterwards, or pretty soon afterwards, because they'd already filmed quite a lot of it before David Tennant's final episode aired. And I remember it was all just really exciting. Yeah, I kind of agree with you. Like, I think it is a bit messy, and I feel like you kind of wish that they could have, I think, maybe featured some different parts. So they featured quite odd people from the Doctor's past in some cases. But no, I think it's a really fun episode, a really big episode. And I think as well, like that scene with him and Rose is just so nice. Like, I mean, not sure if it quite makes sense timeline-wise, but it is just kind of, I don't know, it's just kind of fun.
Having Timothy Dalton in an episode having Timothy Dalton in anything makes it better. So
I mean, he's so good. I mean, I'm really gutted they couldn't get him back again to be Rassilon in the peak of the era. That would have been great. But he's really, really good in this. And John Sim, obviously, as well, as the Master.
John Sim and Bernard Cribbins, the 4 knocks, the heartbreaking 4 knocks. And David Tennant, I love the speech the 10th Doctor gives once he realises what is happening with the 4 knocks. And he's sort of raging that he could do so much more. I think brilliant scene.
Yeah. But there had to be an end. There had to be an end to the 10th Doctor, just as there has to be an end to this list, because we're back at number 1. 13% of the vote went to A Christmas Carol. Now, we sort of talked about this at the beginning. We kind of know, when it came out and everything. But yeah, the basic story is the Doctor goes to a sort of alien town where there's an old miser who is so miserable and evil that he's not going to save the lives of people who he could easily save. And the Doctor realizes that he's hearing a Christmas carol, and he's like, wait a minute, a Christmas carol, let's do that. So basically he inserts himself in Kazran Sardik, played by Michael Gambon's past, and kind of, changes his life. And then, you have Amy Pond as the Ghost of Christmas Present, and then you have Kazran himself as the Ghost of Christmas Future, which is so brilliantly clever. I think that scene is so great. But yeah, I mean, this is it's a funny episode, isn't it? It has that kind of weird alienness problem that I think I have with Voyage of the Damned, where I sort of, when it's sort of human-like people on a planet that isn't quite Earth, I'm a little bit like, I kind of not quite sure what the kind of reference points and things are. But I just think this was kind of, again, it was Stephen Moffat's first go at a Christmas special, and I often think those are the best. You know what I mean? Like, they kind of get to use their ideas for what a Christmas special of Doctor Who would be.
Yeah, you use your best ideas first, right? Because of course.
Yeah, and I feel like it's very clever. It's very, like, we said timey-wimey earlier. We said humanly-wimey. It is quite timey-wimey in the sort of Stephen Moffat sense. But I think It's very clever, kind of using time travel to try and change somebody. I mean, it kind of slightly makes you question the rules of Doctor Who in general and why he doesn't do that all the time whenever he meets someone mean. But he has literally all the time in the world. But yeah, I think it's very clever. It's very festive. There's a flying shark in it. Catherine Jenkins is there. They go to various parties in history. I think there's a lot of fun in it. It's quite gentle. Like, it is basically the Doctor trying to persuade someone of something, but then I think it kind of works because of that. I don't know. I think sometimes it's Doctor Who Christmas specials are walking a balance of incident and like emotion. I think this one strides it really nicely.
I think as well, like, it's coming off the back of series 5, which it's Stephen Moffat and his team of Matt Smith, Karen Gillan, Arthur Darvill. Them just after series 5, kind of the height of their powers, because it's that period where Doctor Who could have just gone off a cliff. It's we've had the peak of the end of time and the end of the David Tennant, Russell T Davies, Julie Gardner era. It's done. Is Doctor Who done? There were questions around that at the time, and then series 5 was so good, which we've talked about on this podcast before. I know we're both big fans of that series, and sort of defied all expectation and was absolutely brilliant. And then this is like, again, almost like a lap of honor. It's like, well done. Now you have a brilliant Christmas special to top it all off. So I feel like I actually think Christmas Carol is a really good episode. You said it's really clever, really fun, really nicely done. But I also think a lot of fondness for that first burst of energy that came from the Moffat era. A lot of that affection is directed at Christmas Carol as well. And it's got a great guest cast, Michael Gambon, of course. It's also, in my opinion, got the best Doctor Who Christmas song. I think Abigail's song just about inches song for 10, with Love Don't Roam sort of somewhere underneath.
Yeah, they should do more Doctor Who themed carols. I think that should be a thing.
They stopped because Song for 10 is great. Then Love Don't Roam was okay, and then Abigail's song is brilliant. And then they kind of it was a thing for a bit that every year you'd have an original Doctor Who Christmas song, which is absolutely mad. But I enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's a really good episode and a worthy winner. I mean, so if anyone listening is kind of missing the Christmas specials, we've obviously given you a bit of a rundown of all the Doctor Who Christmas specials. And if you're listening to this on Christmas Day, maybe stick on A Christmas Carol and reminisce, or any of the others. Maybe even the return of Dr. Mysterio. It's right down at the bottom of the list. Maybe it's been overlooked. I mean, I've got to say, talking about all this does make me slightly nostalgic for the days of the Doctor Who Christmas episodes. I mean, it's only 2017 they stopped, but I mean, I do kind of hope that they do another one. Like, I'd love to see a Jodie Whittaker one at some point.
Well, I think as well. I think the Doctor Who Christmas specials collectively have a bit of a bad rap for being. I think people think they're a bit naff, and it's like, oh, here we go again. Like we said, here we go again. Exploding baubles and killer Christmas trees and robot snowmen. Here we go. So actually, when it was announced that they weren't going to do any more, at least they're not going to do one. They weren't going to do one a few years back. I think people were split as between we're not getting any more Doctor Who Christmas specials, and some people were saying, well, good, because they're always a bit naff anyway. I don't think
just to be completely fair, I think I did get a bit of stick for this online. I think I was one of the people who said they're always rubbish.
But no, I think there's kind of like received wisdom that the Doctor Who Christmas specials are always rubbish, and I kind of feel like that a bit as well. I'm like, they're not the best episodes, but they're fun after a few sherries. They're fun on Christmas Day. They're sort of light and disposable and throwaway, but they're not actually the episodes that are the best. They're not the ones you go back and rewatch. And actually, having done this, I don't think that's true. I think, in my opinion, there's only one bad one.
Which is the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe.
Which is the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. There's a bunch of quite good ones, and then there's a few brilliant ones. And to be honest, that's kind of how Doctor Who episodes break down anyway, right? I don't think it's Christmas specific. I think there's a few that are actually sort of actively bad. Most of them are pretty good, and then there's like a smaller cluster, of course, which are like fantastic. So yeah, no, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing. Like, Doctor Who had done a lot of Christmas specials. I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing that they've been stopped or at least given a rest. But I agree. I hope one day we'll see a Doctor Who Christmas special again.
But what do you think, our particularly festive listeners? Would you like to see the return of the Doctor Who Christmas special? Do you like the New Year ones? And, do you think we should have more festive specials around the year? Maybe more Easter specials and a Halloween special. You never know. Why not? One for your birthday, you specifically, the person listening. And also, we should probably ask, what do you think of our ranking? Is this fair? Does Dr. Mysterio deserve a higher ranking? Is A Christmas Carol really the worthy winner? Or do you think, Twice Upon a Time deserves to be higher? Whatever you think, please let us know in the comments or on Twitter, Facebook, however you want to get in touch with us. Thank you for listening on this particularly festive episode, and indeed for listening to us all year. We've been doing these Doctor Who podcasts for a year now, and we always really appreciate everyone listening in. We'll be back, hopefully, soon with more previews and reviews of the new festive episode, Revolution of the Daleks, which I'm sure we'll have in a poll like this next year. And we'll be back in the new year with some more general Doctor Who stuff. Until then, I've been Hugh.
I've been Morgan.
And I'd like to wish Who a Merry Christmas and a happy Who year. I really wanted to try to land that without stuttering over it. Okay, thanks for listening again, and goodbye.